In the Age of Discovery, Portugal's caravels were the iron will of an empire, instruments of conquest that had mastered the storms and terrors of the known world. But in 1498, off a stretch of ocean that would earn the cursed name the Coast of Whispers, the crew of the São Cristóvão encountered a force that no map could chart and no cannon could answer. It was not a tempest. It was not a beast of horn and scale. It was a sound that began as a vibration in the hull and ended as a voice in the mind, a perfect, intimate mimicry of their wives, their children, and their long-dead parents, whispering promises of a paradise just beyond the horizon. This is the chronicle of how 4 of the world's most advanced ships were not sunk, but surgically dismantled, lured one by one into the abyss by an acoustic predator that weaponized the very concept of hope. If you believe the darkest secrets of our history are not buried on land, but lie waiting in the crushing silence of the abyss, then join our expedition. Let us know in the comments from what port or city you are joining this voyage, and subscribe to our channel. Together, we will uncover the forbidden logs and silenced accounts that the world's great maritime powers never wanted brought to light. The year is 1498. The sun, a relentless, brassy disk, beat down upon the vast, indifferent expanse of the Atlantic. A Portuguese caravel, the São Cristóvão, a vessel of stout oak and pine, her sails bleached by 1,000 suns, sliced a lonely furrow through waters that shimmered like hammered silver. Days bled into weeks, a monotonous procession of endless horizon and the rhythmic creak of timbers. Her captain, Vasco da Lima, a man whose face was a roadmap of salt and sun, stood on his quarterdeck, his eyes the color of a stormy winter sea, perpetually scanning the empty expanse. His crew, a hardy collection of sun-baked souls, toiled under the relentless heat, their minds dreaming of distant Lisbon, of cool wine and warm embraces. They were a veteran lot, these men, accustomed to the ocean's many moods, to its sudden rages and its deceptive calms. But this calm was different. It began subtly, as the truly insidious things often do. A faint, almost imperceptible thrum, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate not through the air, but through the very fabric of the ship, up through the soles of their worn boots and into their chests. It was a sound that defied categorization, too deep for the wind, too rhythmic for the waves. At first, the men dismissed it, the groaning of the hull, the sigh of timbers settling, the phantom ache of long voyages. They were tired, after all, and the sea could play tricks on a weary mind. But the hum persisted. It was a low, sustained note, a bass chord struck by an unseen hand in the depths below. It was not loud, never loud, but it was there, a constant, unnerving presence beneath the surface of their mundane existence. Some men swore they felt it in their teeth, a dull, persistent ache behind their eyes. Others claimed the very water around the hull seemed to shimmer with an unnatural vibrance, though their eyes could confirm no such thing. The São Cristóvão sailed onward, her course true, her purpose clear. Yet, an invisible current of unease began to flow through the crew. The casual banter died down, replaced by a tense, watchful silence. Men would cast furtive glances at the glassy surface, then at each other, their unspoken questions hanging heavy in the hot, still air. Even Captain de Lima, a man who scoffed at superstition, found himself listening more intently, his brow furrowing with a discomfort he could not name. He ordered the lead line dropped, checking the depth, though he knew it was futile. The anomaly was not of the seabed, it was something else. Something else! The air itself seemed to grow heavy, thick with an unseen pressure. The sun, though still blazing, seemed to cast longer, more distorted shadows. The hum, that pervasive, unsettling thrum, began to deepen, its resonance growing, almost as if it were a colossal, submerged bell, struck once, then again, its vibrations echoing through the very bones of the world. It was a sound that hinted at immense, ancient power, a sound that spoke of depths far greater than any fathom line could measure, and it was calling. The hum intensified, no longer a mere vibration but a palpable presence, a low, guttural murmur that seemed to fill the very air around the San Cristobal. It was a sound that resonated not just in their bodies, but in the deepest, most primordial parts of their minds. And then it changed. The first mate, a stern, practical man named Gaspar, was overseeing the restowing of some shifted cargo when he froze. His head cocked, his calloused hands still on the rope. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper, carried on a breeze that wasn't there, seemed to brush past his ear. It was indistinct, a fleeting breath of sound, yet it sent a shiver down his spine. He dismissed it as the creak of the ship, the stress of the timbers, but then he heard it again, clearer this time, a sound that was unmistakably, chillingly human. It was a name, his name, whispered in a voice that was both familiar and utterly alien, a voice that seemed to echo from the distant past, from a half-forgotten dream. Gaspar, who had faced down mutinies and storms without flinching, felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He spun around, searching the empty deck, the empty sea, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. No one, nothing. But then other men began to hear it. Young Tiago, polishing a brass fitting, suddenly dropped his cloth, his face pale. "Did you hear that?" he stammered, looking wildly about. "Someone called my mother's name." An old mariner, usually stoic and unshakable, clutched his crucifix, his lips moving in a silent prayer. He swore he heard the voice of his long-dead wife, calling him home. The sounds were not uniform. For some, it was a loved one's name, whispered with aching tenderness. For others, it was the comforting voice of a priest, reciting a prayer they had heard in childhood. For a few, it was a command, clear and authoritative, to sail on, to seek the light, to follow the path. Each sound was perfectly tailored, perfectly crafted to appeal to the deepest longings, the most profound vulnerabilities of the listener. It was a cruel, intimate summons. Captain de Lima, initially skeptical, found himself standing rigid on the quarterdeck, his hand pressed to his ear. He swore he heard the voice of his father, long lost to the sea, urging him forward, promising a discovery beyond all dreams. His resolve, usually iron-hard, wavered. A strange, intoxicating euphoria began to spread through the crew. The fear that had initially gripped them morphed into a desperate, compelling desire. They were no longer afraid, they were drawn. The compass, usually a steadfast guide, began to waver, its needle swinging wildly, then settling on a course that was undeniably wrong, veering sharply to the southwest, away from their charted route, away from Lisbon. De Lima, in a daze, felt an overwhelming urge to follow its erratic guidance. It felt right. It felt like destiny. His first mate, Gaspar, now under the full sway of the hypnotic sounds, did not object. He too was listening, his eyes fixed on a point on the horizon that existed only in his mind. The San Cristobal, under an unseen, unholy influence, began to deviate from her course. Her sails, catching a breeze that seemed to come from nowhere, billowed, pulling her inexorably towards a part of the ocean unmarked on any map, a region known only by the chilling whispers of mariners who spoke of strange currents and unnatural fogs. The crew, their faces rapt, almost ecstatic, made no attempt to correct the course. They were no longer sailing, they were being led by voices that promised everything, yet offered only the chilling embrace of the unknown. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and blood orange, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch out, reaching for the doomed caravel as she sailed towards her enigmatic fate. The San Cristobal plunged deeper into the uncharted waters, her crew utterly enthralled, their every action dictated by the invisible symphony from the depths. The sun, a swollen, indifferent eye in the sky, seemed to abandon them. The air grew heavy, thick with a peculiar chill that defied the tropical latitude. It was a cold that seeped into the bones, a cold that felt ancient and wrong. The ocean itself began to change. The familiar cerulean hues of the open sea gave way to an inky, bruised purple, reflecting the bruised sky above. The surface, which moments before had shimmered with the sun's reflection, now grew unnaturally calm, flat and oily, like polished obsidian. It was a stillness that was deeply unsettling, a silence that felt less like peace and more like the bated breath of a colossal, unseen entity. No waves broke against the hull. No seabirds cried overhead. The world around the São Cristóvão had become a vast, silent chamber, a watery tomb. And within this profound stillness, the voices intensified. They were no longer whispers, but clear, resonant sounds, vibrating in the very air, in the very water. For some, it was the laughter of children, echoing from a childhood long past. For others, the tender murmurings of a lover, words of eternal devotion. And for Captain de Lima, the voice of his father, now strong and commanding, urging him to "Come closer, my son, for here lies the true passage, the light beyond the veil." He gripped the tiller, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on a point far ahead, where the inky darkness of the horizon seemed to deepen into an even more profound, unsettling black. The compass, now spinning with frantic, useless abandon, was utterly ignored. The São Cristóvão was no longer guided by man or instrument, but by an unseen, irresistible current that flowed not from the ocean's depths, but from the depths of the human soul. The very timbers of the ship groaned, a mournful lament against the unnatural forces that held her. The air grew thick with a strange, sweet scent, like overblown night-blooming jasmine mixed with something metallic, something like old, cold blood. The water around the caravel began to glow with a faint, unearthly phosphorescence, a sickly green light that pulsed with the rhythm of the unseen hum. It was as if the very abyss was breathing, its colossal lungs expanding and contracting beneath them. Strange, gelatinous forms, unseen in these latitudes, drifted past the hull, their forms vaguely unsettling, their movements slow and deliberate, like denizens of a forgotten realm. The temperature plummeted further, a profound alien cold that seemed to suck the warmth from their very bodies. The crew, their faces pale and drawn in the eerie green light, moved as if in a trance. Their eyes were wide, vacant, staring into a perceived horizon that was not there, lost in the intoxicating promise of the voices that filled their minds. They trimmed the sails with dreamlike precision, adjusted the rigging with an unnatural efficiency, all in service to the invisible siren call that pulled them deeper into the unknown. They were no longer men, they were puppets, their strings pulled by an unseen master. Captain de Lima, though still somewhat aware, felt his will eroding, dissolving like sugar in hot tea. He knew intellectually that this was wrong, that he was abandoning his course, his duty, his men. But the voice, his father's voice, was so compelling, so filled with ancient wisdom and undeniable truth. It promised revelation, understanding, an end to all his worldly burdens. He felt a profound sense of peace, a calm that was both terrifying and utterly seductive. He felt himself yielding, surrendering to the inevitable. The São Cristóvão, a silent, phosphorescent ghost, plunged deeper into the heart of the anomaly, drawn by a promise that whispered of salvation but tasted of doom. The light from the setting sun, a memory now, faded entirely, leaving them adrift in a world of alien cold, of pulsating green light, and the omnipresent, intoxicating voices that called them to their doom. The São Cristóvão had sailed beyond the veil. The cold was now absolute, a biting, suffocating chill that seemed to leach the very life from the air. The phosphorescent glow from the water intensified, casting the ship in an unearthly, spectral light, illuminating the faces of the crew, faces wrapped with an unnerving ecstasy, their eyes wide and unblinking, fixed on an unseen point beyond the bow. The voices were no longer distinct whispers or commands. They had coalesced into a single, overwhelming chorus, a symphony of lost souls, of forgotten dreams, of promises beyond mortal comprehension. It was a sound that filled every crevice of the ship, every corner of their minds, leaving no room for thought, no space for resistance. The ship, now gliding through water as still and black as a mirror, began to descend, not with the lurch of a wreck, but with a slow, deliberate grace, as if being lowered by an invisible hand. The pressure built, a crushing weight that squeezed the very air from their lungs. Yet the men felt no pain, only a deepening sense of blissful surrender. Captain de Lima, his eyes glazed, watched as the masthead, then the sails, then the deck itself, dipped below the shimmering phosphorescent surface. The last thing he saw, or perhaps imagined, was a vast, pulsating shadow beneath them, a form so immense it defied description, a living abyss from which the voices seemed to emanate. The water, icy and black, rose around them, silent, relentless. It filled the deck, seeped into the cabins, embraced the men who stood unmoving, their arms outstretched, their lips parted in a silent, final gasp of acceptance. There were no screams, no struggles, only the sound of water rushing into confined spaces and the pervasive, lulling chorus from the depths. The São Cristóvão, a vessel once vibrant with life, became a silent, watery tomb, her timbers groaning one last faint lament as she was swallowed whole. Her lanterns, still lit, flickered and died, one by one, until only the unholy phosphorescence of the deep remained, a spectral light illuminating the final descent. The current that had drawn them in now embraced them entirely, pulling them down, down, into the crushing, lightless heart of the ocean. Years later, when a salvage crew, driven by desperate hope and old charts, stumbled upon the São Cristóvão, she was a derelict. Her sails rotted to rags, her deck thick with strange, iridescent algae. There was no sign of her crew, no bones, no trace. Only the compass, still wildly spinning, and the captain's logbook, its final entries detailing the seductive, fatal voices. The very air around the ghost ship felt cold, heavy, and still, as if the echoes of that abyssal chorus still lingered, waiting for a new audience. The ocean, dear chroniclers, is a master of deception. It cradles beauty, yet conceals horrors beyond imagination. The tale of the São Cristóvão is but one chilling note in its silent, terrifying symphony. If you find yourself drawn to these half-forgotten legends, to the mysteries that lie beneath the waves, then I invite you to join our journey. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more tales from the abyss, for more journeys into the heart of maritime mystery. Your engagement helps us bring these stories to light, stories that the ocean itself would prefer remain buried in the crushing dark. The disappearance of the São Cristóvão was initially dismissed by the Crown as a tragic but solitary incident, a rogue storm perhaps, or a navigational error. The vast, hungry ocean claimed many vessels in those days, but the sea, dear chroniclers, rarely acts without a pattern, and the abyss, once it finds a taste for something, is insatiable. Years after the São Cristóvão was swallowed by the deep, the whispers began anew. This time the stage was set further south along the ancient trade routes that snaked towards the burgeoning Spice Islands. The year was 1505. Another caravel, the Santa Lucia, a sleek, swift vessel known for her speed, was making good time on her return voyage. Her captain, a young, ambitious man named Diogo Fernandes, was eager to make his mark, to deliver his precious cargo of pepper and cinnamon to the docks of Lisbon. His crew was seasoned, disciplined, their morale high from a successful journey. But the ocean has a long memory, and the unseen forces that had claimed the São Cristóvão were stirring once more. It began, as before, with the hum, a low, pervasive thrum that seemed to rise from the very belly of the sea, vibrating through the hull of the Santa Lucia. It was subtle at first, easily mistaken for the rhythmic pulse of the ship against the waves, or the deep resonance of the rigging in a steady breeze. But it grew, slowly, inexorably, until it was an undeniable presence, a constant, unsettling pressure in the air. The crew, already weary from the long voyage, found their nerves frayed. They tossed and turned in their hammocks, disturbed by the persistent, sub-audible vibration that seemed to penetrate their very bones. Then came the cold. An unnatural chill descended upon the Santa Lucia, a cold that felt alien and profound, defying the warm equatorial sun that blazed overhead. It was a cold that seemed to suck the very warmth from their bodies, leaving them shivering despite the clear skies. a thin, unnatural mist began to cling to the surface of the water around the ship, swirling like tendrils of smoke, though no wind stirred it. The sea, too, began to shift its hue from a vibrant sapphire to an unsettling, bruised indigo, reflecting the deepening unease that settled upon the vessel. But the true terror, the insidious lure, was the sound that followed. It was not a chaotic roar, nor the shriek of a monster. It was, impossibly, the sound of human voices. Faint at first, carried on the phantom breeze that accompanied the chill, then growing clearer, more distinct. For some, it was the sound of distant church bells ringing out over the sea, calling them to prayer. For others, the joyous laughter of children playing on a sun-drenched beach, a sound that stirred a profound, aching longing for home. Captain Fernandez, initially convinced it was the onset of a fever among his men, grew increasingly bewildered. He ordered lookouts to scan the horizon, convinced they were nearing land, or perhaps another vessel, but the horizon remained empty, a vast, unbroken circle of dark water and bruised sky. Yet, the sounds persisted, growing louder, more compelling, and then he heard it himself, clear as a bell, the voice of his beloved mother, calling his childhood nickname, urging him towards a safe harbor that lay in a direction utterly contrary to his charts, to all logic. The Santa Lucia's compass, like its ill-fated predecessor, began to spin erratically, its needle dancing a frantic, meaningless jig. And just as with the San Cristobal, an inexplicable current, a powerful, unseen force, began to draw the Santa Lucia off course, pulling her steadily towards a region of the ocean known for its abyssal depths and its unsettling, persistent calms. The crew, their faces pale and drawn, their eyes fixed on an unseen promise, made no move to correct their heading. They were already lost, not to the sea, but to the intoxicating, soul-deep call that promised everything they ever desired, leading them inexorably towards the waiting dark. The Santa Lucia continued her inexplicable deviation, pulled deeper into the featureless expanse where the ocean turned a cold, inky black. The hum, that pervasive, unsettling vibration, now resonated not just through the hull, but through the very air, a constant, low thrum that seemed to vibrate in their chests, in their teeth, in the marrow of their bones. And the voices, oh, the voices. They were no longer faint, no longer fleeting. They were clear, intimate, and utterly, terrifyingly real. This was no mere echo, no simple acoustic illusion. The nature of the call was too precise, too personal. For the deeply religious, the sounds were fervent prayers recited in the familiar, comforting cadence of their village priest or the solemn chant of a choir in a cathedral. For the homesick, it was the specific, loving endearments of a wife, a child's innocent giggle, or the hearty, familiar laugh of a brother. For the ambitious, it was the promise of untold riches, of glory, of a legacy etched into the annals of history, whispered in a voice of profound authority. Each sailor, individually, heard precisely what their heart most longed for, what their soul most desperately craved. The creature, or force, or entity, whatever it was that dwelled in those lightless depths, was not merely making noise. It was mimicking, and not just mimicking sound, but mimicking meaning. It was a predator, yes, but one of terrifying, almost sentient cunning, employing a form of acoustic lure far beyond any known terrestrial or aquatic beast. A deep-sea anglerfish uses a bioluminescent lure. This creature used the very fabric of human yearning. One young sailor, a lad named Tomas, swore he heard his grandmother, long dead, singing a lullaby from his infancy, a melody he hadn't thought of in decades. Tears streamed down his face as he stumbled towards the rail, his arms outstretched, ready to plunge into the dark water, convinced she was just beneath the surface, waiting to embrace him. Another, the ship's grizzled carpenter, a man who had seen too much and believed in little, began to weep openly, hearing his own name called by a voice identical to that of his lost son, who had drowned years ago in a river. "Father," the voice would call, soft and clear, "come to me. The water is warm. The currents are gentle." Captain Fernandez fought it for a time. He lashed himself to the mast, his face a mask of agony, as the voice of his mother shifted, growing more insistent, then more desperate, then finally, tragically, turning to a sound of profound, unbearable sorrow, as if he were abandoning her in her greatest need. He screamed, ordering his men to change course, to resist, but his words were lost, unheard, drowned out by the chorus that filled their minds. His men, their faces vacant with a terrifying bliss, continued to steer the ship deeper, their movements fluid and obedient, like automatons. They were beyond his reach, beyond salvation. The eerie phosphorescence from the water now pulsed with a sickening rhythm, and the air crackled with a strange, almost electric energy. The Santa Lucia was not merely sailing, she was being drawn, dragged by an invisible tether, directly into the heart of a phenomenon that understood the very core of human desire. It was not a physical trap, not a net or a reef. It was a psychic one, a lure woven from sound and longing, designed to shatter the will and guide the doomed straight into the abyss. The creature, if it was a creature, did not need to attack. It merely needed to call. And the men, tragically, irresistibly, answered. The chilling truth of these events, these disappearances, resonates through the deep. If you find yourself captivated by the ocean's silent, terrifying power and the mysteries it holds, then please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to chronicle these forgotten tales, to shine a light into the darkest corners of maritime history. The fate of the Santa Lucia, like that of the São Cristóvão, remained shrouded in the same chilling silence. No wreckage, no bodies, only the pervasive, unsettling tales whispered by the few sailors who had skirted the edges of the anomaly and lived to tell of the unnatural calm, the profound cold, and the phantom voices. But the abyss, as I said, has an insatiable appetite, and a pattern, once established, is rarely broken. The years that followed saw two more caravels, both Portuguese, succumb to the same enigmatic fate. Each incident, though separated by time and distance, bore the horrifying hallmarks of the first two disappearances, solidifying a pattern that sent tremors of dread through the maritime world. First, there was the Estrela do Mar, Star of the Sea. In 1511, this sturdy merchant vessel, on a return voyage from the lucrative West African Gold Coast, vanished without a trace. Her last known position placed her dangerously close to the region where the São Cristóvão was last sighted. The few ships that reported seeing her prior to her disappearance spoke of her sailing erratically, her sails trimmed for a course that made no sense, veering sharply into uncharted waters. A lone, terrified survivor, a young cabin boy found clinging to a piece of flotsam days later, babbled incoherently of singing water and voices from the deep that promised him his mother's warm embrace. He never fully recovered his sanity, spending his remaining years staring blankly at the sea, occasionally whispering fragments of the alluring, deadly melodies. His account, though dismissed by many as the ravings of a traumatized mind, chilled those who heard it, for it echoed the nascent, half-formed rumors of the São Cristóvão's end. Then, in 1518, the Fidalgo, nobleman, a smaller, faster caravel commissioned for an exploratory mission, met the same doom. She was tasked with charting new routes, pushing the boundaries of the known world. Her captain, a renowned cartographer named Pedro Alvarez, was a man of science and logic, deeply skeptical of superstition. Yet his final, incomplete log entries, recovered years later from a miraculously preserved water-damaged chest, spoke of a growing acoustic anomaly and unbearable mental pressure. He meticulously documented the plummeting temperatures, the unnerving stillness of the water, and the strange, iridescent glow that emanated from the depths. But it was the final, desperate lines that echoed the horror of the previous disappearances. The men hear them now, clear as day. Their names, their prayers, mine own. She whispers of the map to the world's true heart. My will, it falters. The compass spins. Oh God, we are sailing towards what? The log abruptly ended, the ink smudged, as if the writer had been torn from his task. The Fidalgo was never seen again. 4 caravels, 4 vanishings, each ship drawn by an unseen force, lured by an impossible mimicry of human speech, pulled into the same abyssal region. The pattern was undeniable, horrifying in its precise, predatory consistency. It was not chance. It was not a storm. It was a deliberate, intelligent act, orchestrated by something ancient and cunning that dwelled in the lightless depths. The sea was not merely claiming ships, it was hunting them, using the deepest desires of man as its bait. The once whispered tales of the Coast of Whispers now became a chilling, undeniable truth, a warning etched into the very currents of the Atlantic. The sea was not just a path to discovery, it was a gateway to an unseen, insidious horror, a realm where human longing became a fatal song. The cumulative loss of 4 caravels, particularly vessels of the Crown, could not be ignored. Lisbon, the bustling heart of Portugal's burgeoning maritime empire, began to hum with a different kind of murmur, not of trade and discovery, but of unease and dread. The disappearances, initially treated as isolated tragedies, now coalesced into a chilling pattern, a direct challenge to Portugal's naval supremacy and its very understanding of the natural world. The Crown, under King Manuel I, a monarch deeply invested in Portugal's overseas expansion, was initially perplexed. Official inquiries were launched, led by seasoned admirals and royal navigators, yet their findings were frustratingly vague. No signs of struggle, no widespread wreckage, no clear cause. The few survivors from other ships who spoke of phantom voices were often dismissed as shell-shocked or superstitious, but the sheer monetary loss, coupled with the erosion of crew morale, demanded a more serious response. Recently discovered, heavily redacted Admiralty reports from the era, now held in a private archive in Porto, hint at the growing alarm. A letter from Admiral Afonso de Albuquerque, a man not given to flights of fancy, to the king's chief minister, dated 1520, expresses his profound disquiet. "Sire, the reports from the Western Quadrant are troubling. 4 vessels, each lost in a manner that defies explanation. The consistency of the accounts, however wild, compels me to consider the possibility of an unknown peril, not of storm or reef, but of something else." This something else was the terrifying, unspoken fear that began to grip the naval establishment. Secret advisories, issued by the Casa de India, the royal agency overseeing Portugal's maritime trade, began circulating among captains. These advisories, marked for captain's eyes only, warned of anomalous navigational disturbances and unexplained acoustic phenomena in the region, urging extreme caution and deviation from certain routes. They stopped short of explicitly mentioning voices, fearing widespread panic, but the implication was clear. Something was luring ships to their doom, and it was not a conventional threat. Recruitment for westward voyages became increasingly difficult. Seasoned sailors, men who had faced down hurricanes and fought off Barbary pirates, suddenly found reasons to remain ashore, their faces pale, at the mention of the Coast of Whispers, or the Silent Zone. The tales, once confined to tavern whispers, now held an undeniable, terrifying weight. Sailors spoke of a phantom siren, not of a beautiful woman, but of a shapeless entity that spoke with the voices of their dead, leading them to a watery grave. The Crown, desperate to maintain its dominance of the seas, even considered dispatching armed caravels on patrol, not to seek out hostile ships, but to guard against an unseen, unnatural enemy. However, the sheer vastness of the Atlantic, combined with the elusive nature of the threat, made such an undertaking impossible. How do you fight a voice? How do you chart a course around an invisible lure that preys on the very heart of a man's longing? The official stance remained one of unexplained maritime losses, but within the hushed chambers of the Admiralty and in the anxious prayers of the dockside churches, a deeper, more chilling truth was beginning to take root. Portugal, a nation that had dared to conquer the ocean, was now confronted by a force that defied all its maps, all its cannons, all its courage. A force that understood the human soul better than any living man, and used that understanding as its most potent, most terrifying weapon. The ocean, it seemed, had revealed a new, more insidious form of dominion, one that preyed not on the body, but on the mind, and left only silence in its wake. In an age where the unknown was often attributed to the divine or the demonic, the inexplicable disappearances of the caravels naturally captured the attention of the Church. The prevailing scholastic thought of the time, rooted deeply in theological interpretation, sought to understand these maritime horrors through a spiritual lens. This was the deep-root principle in full effect. Every mystery, every anomaly, had a metaphysical cause, a moral lesson, or a divine purpose. Monasteries, particularly those with strong ties to maritime communities, became centers of speculation. Monks, poring over ancient texts and newly arrived, often fragmented, accounts from fearful sailors, began to formulate theories that blended scriptural prophecy with folklore. One prevalent theory, gaining traction among the Benedictine scholars of Coimbra, suggested that the vanished ships were victims of a deliberate divine judgment. The Age of Discovery, with its relentless pursuit of wealth and its often brutal treatment of indigenous peoples, was seen by some as an act of hubris, a transgression against God's natural order. The voices from the deep, therefore, were interpreted as the seductive whispers of infernal agents, devils or succubi of the sea, sent by an angered God to lead the ambitious and the greedy to their eternal damnation. The fact that the voices mimicked sacred prayers or beloved family members only strengthened this argument. It was the ultimate temptation, a test of faith, a lure designed to exploit the very virtues it mimicked. Another theory, favored by the Augustinian friars, leaned towards the concept of spectral lures. This wasn't a punishment from God, but a manifestation of the tormented souls of the drowned. The ocean, they argued, was a vast, restless purgatory for those lost without proper rites or burial. These restless spirits, unable to find peace, sought companionship, luring the living to join them in their watery limbo. The voices in this interpretation were genuine echoes of lost loved ones, twisted and amplified by the ocean's malevolence, serving as a desperate, unwitting plea from the dead. A letter from an anonymous monk, dated circa 1530, found recently in the archives of a monastery near Faro, speaks of the deep, a vast maw that consumes body and soul, and from which the lost cry out, their laments twisted into songs of false comfort, dragging the living into their cold, wet despair. A third, more esoteric interpretation, found among certain reclusive mystics and hermits who lived along the wild coast, proposed that the voices were not external at all, but internal. They spoke of the ocean as a living consciousness, a vast, primordial entity that reflected back the deepest desires and fears of those who sailed upon it. The call of the deep, therefore, was not a creature's mimicry, but the sailors' own anxieties, their homesickness, their guilt, their ambitions, amplified and returned to them from the abyssal depths. In this view, the ships were not actively lured, but rather drawn by their own psychological demons, their internal struggles externalized by the ocean's reflective power. The ocean simply held up a mirror to their souls, and they, consumed by their own reflections, sailed willingly into oblivion. These monastic theories, though often dismissed by the pragmatic navigators of the time, offered a framework for understanding the incomprehensible. They provided a spiritual deep root to a mystery that defied all conventional explanation. The voice from the deep was not just a terrifying anomaly, it was a profound spiritual challenge, a testament to the unseen forces that govern the world, and a chilling reminder that the human soul, with its deepest longings and its hidden weaknesses, was as much a part of the ocean's mystery as any monstrous beast. The true horror, they argued, was not the creature itself, but the terrible truth it revealed about the fragility of the human mind when confronted with its own desires, echoed back from the abyss. Centuries later, the chilling narratives of the singing caravels remain potent, woven into the very fabric of maritime folklore. Yet the modern era, armed with scientific inquiry and psychological understanding, offers alternative lenses through which to view these enigmatic disappearances. While the romantic allure of a sentient, mimicking abyss holds its power, rational explanations, born from a deeper understanding of the ocean's complexities and the human mind, provide plausible, if no less unsettling, hypotheses. One compelling theory, championed by contemporary marine acousticians like Dr. Ilara Vance from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, points to the phenomenon of infrasound. Infrasound refers to sounds pitched below the threshold of human hearing, typically below 20 Hz. Large marine animals, seismic activity, and even powerful ocean currents can generate these low-frequency vibrations. While typically inaudible, infrasound can be felt as a pervasive pressure, a deep thrumming that can induce profound physiological and psychological effects in humans. Prolonged exposure can cause feelings of unease, anxiety, disorientation, and even vivid hallucinations. Could the initial hum experienced by the caravel crews have been a powerful, naturally occurring infrasound phenomenon? And could the human brain, struggling to interpret this profound, unsettling vibration, have created the voices as a form of auditory hallucination, a desperate attempt to make sense of an incomprehensible sensory input? The brain, after all, is a pattern-seeking organ, and in extreme stress it can conjure meaning where none exists. Another hypothesis, explored by speculative marine biologists such as Professor Eris Thorne of the National Oceanography Center, suggests the possibility of a rare or ancient marine species capable of sophisticated vocal mimicry. While no known creature possesses the ability to perfectly replicate human speech, the ocean is vast and largely unexplored. Certain deep-sea creatures, such as some whales or cephalopods, communicate through complex vocalizations. Is it conceivable that an undiscovered, highly intelligent predator evolved a unique hunting strategy, mimicking the sounds of its prey's social interactions or distress calls? This wouldn't be speech in the human sense, but a perfect, acoustically engineered lure. Imagine a colossal, ancient leviathan dwelling in the abyssal plains that has for millennia observed human vessels, learning to replicate the sounds of their longing, their comfort, their commands, using them as a perfect bait to draw ships into its crushing embrace. The sweet, metallic odor, reported by one survivor, could be a chemical lure, a pheromone released by such a creature, further disorienting the crew. Finally, the most unsettling, yet perhaps most human explanation lies in the realm of mass hysteria or psychological contagion, amplified by the extreme isolation and stress of long sea voyages. Dr. Lena Rostova, a historical psychologist from Oxford, posits that the initial, genuine physiological discomfort caused by infrasound or an unknown environmental factor could have triggered a cascade of fear and suggestion among the superstitious and weary crews. Once one man heard a voice, the power of suggestion, especially in a confined, high-stress environment, could easily lead others to hear similar sounds, tailored to their own subconscious desires and fears. The shared delusion, fueled by desperation and exhaustion, could then become an irresistible force, leading them to willingly steer their ships towards an imagined salvation, and thus to their actual doom. The compass deviations could be attributed to magnetic anomalies in the region, or even deliberate, albeit diluted, manipulation by the crew themselves, convinced they were following a divine or destined path. The true nature of the call of the deeps remains, like the deepest trenches of the ocean, shrouded in mystery. Was it a natural phenomenon, a monstrous predator, or a terrifying manifestation of the human mind under duress? Perhaps it was a chilling confluence of all three. What is certain is that the ocean, in its boundless indifference, continues to hold secrets that defy easy categorization, reminding us that even in an age of scientific advancement, some mysteries remain profoundly, terrifyingly unknown. The fate of the São Cristóvão, the Santa Lucia, the Estrela do Mar, and the Fidalgo remains a chilling testament to the ocean's profound and terrifying secrets. 4 vessels, strong and true, yet drawn not by storm or reef, but by a song woven from human longing, a voice that mimicked their deepest desires and led them willingly into the lightless maw of the abyss. From the frantic smudged entries in ancient logbooks to the hushed advisories of a bewildered crown and the solemn pronouncements of monastic scholars who saw divine judgment or the echoes of tormented souls, the historical record whispers of an anomaly that defied all comprehension. It was a threat that preyed not on the hull, but on the very heart, a silent, insidious hunter that understood the fragile architecture of the human mind. And even now, with our hydrophones plumbing the deepest trenches and our psychology dissecting the intricate dance of fear and hallucination, the mystery endures. Was it the subsonic groan of the planet, twisting minds with its unseen pressure? Could an unknown ancient creature, a master of acoustic mimicry, have perfected a lure born of our own language, our own dreams? Or was it, in the end, the ocean holding a dark, shimmering mirror to our deepest vulnerabilities, our most desperate yearnings, drawing us into a self-created oblivion? The sea, dear chroniclers, is not merely water. It is a vast, living consciousness, a keeper of forgotten epochs, a realm where the line between myth and terrifying reality is as thin and shifting as the ocean fog. It reminds us that for all our maps and our science, there are depths, both in the world and within ourselves, that remain utterly, chillingly unknown. And sometimes, from those depths, something calls. What do you believe truly called to those doomed caravels? Was it beast, spirit, or the darkest reflections of the human soul? Share your theories in the comments below. And if the whispers of the abyss have stirred your own sense of wonder and dread, then join our journey into the unknown. Like this video and subscribe to our channel, for the ocean has countless more tales to tell. Until next time, keep your compass true and listen closely to the silence of the deep.